Don't Depend on Daddy is an unfiltered safe space, empowering young professionals to build independence in their 20s and beyond, whether it be personal, professional, or financial. Regardless of your age, relationship status, or job title, the most consistent person in your life is you. So join me and let's build our independence together. Enjoy! Hello and welcome back to Don't Depend on Daddy, the podcast. My name's Michaela. I am your host, and today we are going to be talking about some of the key differences that I've noticed between your 20s and your 30s as someone who recently turned 30 and clearly am making it my entire personality. Before we get into this episode, and really the general thesis of this, I guess if that's even the right word, is going to be around your 20s being for testing and your 30s really being for building. Before we get into the bulk of the episode, I'm going to, as usual, very quickly run through all of our housekeeping. So first things first, as always, you can get $10 off the personal finance dashboard when you use the code podcast1. This is a podcast exclusive code. And if you are new here, the personal finance dashboard is my signature money management tool. So this is the tool that helped me take my net worth from negative 30,000 to over 7 figures all throughout my 20s. I'm obsessed with the personal finance dashboard. I created it because there was no tool that really worked for me. So ultimately, what this tool has done is made it possible to track your expenses, manage a budget, and just put everything in one place so that you can make data-driven financial decisions. Every single decision I make is run through the personal finance dashboard first. If you are someone who is looking for a tool that's a little bit more, simplified, I would check out the basic budgeting template. This tool was born under your request for a simpler budgeting tool. So if you're just getting started on your personal finance journey, or if you are someone who is really just looking for a place to start tracking your expenses and start visualizing a budget, I recommend checking out the BBT, the basic budgeting template. And last but not least, if you are someone who is planning for retirement, as you should be no matter how old you are, and you want to figure out how much you need to spend and how much you need to save annually in order to reach your retirement targets and really figure out if what you're putting into your 401k is the right amount and answer all of those questions, I recommend checking out my FIRE planning template. This tool is really designed to help you put together your plan for retirement, whether you want to retire in your 60s or maybe you want to retire a little bit earlier or even partially retire. What it's going to do is lay out all of the numbers for you. So with that, let's get into this episode today. And I do actually have a bit of a script because I really don't want to miss anything. So if you're watching on YouTube and I'm not looking at the screen or at the camera, that is why. So let's get into this. I think personally, now that I'm on the other side, the most misadvertised decade of your life is your 20s. And with social media, we're made to think that not only do we need to accomplish everything in our 20s, but that everyone else is doing more than you. And no matter what you're doing, you're behind. It's really just not fair, and it's not realistic, and it's also not real, to be super, super clear. Seeing so many people do so many things is not representative of the masses. It's representative of the small portion of people who share their lives on social media. So today I'm going to unpack this idea a little bit more and discuss why your 20s are really more for testing and figuring things out, obviously strategically, of course, but your 20s are more for testing and your 30s are really for taking the steps to build the life you actually want to have. I turned 30 earlier this year, as you may know, and naturally it has had me reflecting on a lot of things in my life, especially because there are aspects of my life that I'm very, very happy about, and there are aspects of my life that I'm still actively trying to navigate and make changes to. And while I've obviously made a ton of progress in my 20s, that progress was largely concentrated in a few key areas of my life, like my career and my finances, whereas entering this new decade, my focus is pivoting more towards my personal life, my relationships, and structured balance. So now that I have a little bit of hindsight, I really think your 20s are for what I'm going to call calculated experimentation, and your 30s are for settling in a little bit more. What I notice online is that a lot of women in their mid-20s who hit what we're calling this grandma phase, which we all go through, I went through it too, are ultimately rushing milestones, rather than thinking about calculated experimentation and forgetting that turning 30 really is just the start of an entirely new chapter, not the end of your life, hopefully, and also like not the end of being able to do anything or the end of your youth. I think that's sort of what we're misinterpreting 30 as. Like, obviously, 30, the expectations that are on you in terms of maturity are a little bit different, but you're like at 30 and in all throughout your 30s and even your 40s, like you're still young. I don't know why we're acting like you're not. So anyways, I'm going to break this episode out into 3 key phases. First, we're going to talk more about why your 20s are for testing and experimenting with what you actually want out of your life. Then I'm going to share how this shifts a little bit in your 30s and how I personally am approaching it. And then we'll wrap up with some key actions you can take regardless of whether you're in your 20s or your 30s, because, I really want to make sure that as part of this, I have received comments because I often say in your 20s on a lot of my content. Everything that I share, I feel like can largely be applied no matter what your age is. But if I'm in my 20s, I'm going to share more about my 20s because that's the phase of life I'm currently in. And now that I'm 30, I'm going to talk about being in my 30s because I'm 30, right? So let's not be so black and white. Anyways, this is going to cover all of the key aspects I talk about most frequently, which are money, career, lifestyle, and mindset. So let's just get right into it. So this first section, as I mentioned, is more focused on why your 20s are for testing. As I mentioned, think your 20s are a super mismarketed decade. I'm not the only person who holds this belief. I feel like it's talked about pretty often and you don't really believe it until you're in it. They're not entirely for figuring out your life and checking off these arbitrary boxes related to societal expectations. And if you're in your 20s, I would really challenge you to think about if these expectations are even something that you truly want to have, but that's an episode for another day. That being said, it's very important in your 20s to start identifying systems and habits in the path that you want to pursue. So first, in my opinion, the most important pillar to start taking control of are your finances. And your 20s are hard because once you start working, everyone is going to find different financial footing at different paces, and you have to learn to be okay with this. So when it comes to your money, my best advice is to spend your 20s focusing on getting the basics right. Because now I can say, truly from experience, that getting the basics right in my 20s has made and will make my 30s significantly easier and just give me so much more freedom of choice. So what does it mean when I say get the basics right? It means figuring out the budgeting style that you like. So trying different tools and apps and spreadsheets and methods. I tested so many types of budgets and so many different budgeting methods before I landed on my current system. It means setting up the right account. So making sure you have a high yield savings account, a retirement account, a brokerage account. Don't be afraid to move your money around and test out what your comfort levels are with how much cash you keep and how much you invest, and learn how to spend your money. You learn your spending values through experimentation. So start paying attention to what you actually enjoy spending your money on, what feels like wasteful spending, and how you can best align to make sure you're not spending the majority of your money on stuff that feels really wasteful. I have so many YouTube videos about this topic, but if you want a dedicated podcast episode about spending values, please, please, please let me know. Moving on to your career, you don't need to find your dream career in your 20s. Your 20s are for discovering that your dream job actually doesn't exist. I wrote an entire book about this because this was one of the biggest professional realizations I had in my 20s after being fed this propaganda all throughout college that if you work hard, you'll end up getting your dream job. We need to stop mismarketing what working really is. It doesn't have to be something that you fantasize about. I think that that's really weird, to be honest. But anyways, you don't need to find your dream career. Some people do find it in their 20s, but most people really don't hit their professional stride until their 30s and their 40s. What you need to find in your 20s is a role or a job or a career path that you like enough, okay? And it's going to take a couple tries to find that. The likelihood, it happens, but the likelihood that you find the path you want to be on in the first roll out of college is pretty slim. So how do you figure this out? You job hop, okay? Don't be afraid to take career risks, try new things, learn new skills, start a side hustle. I had no idea that I loved social media and I loved doing TV appearances and I loved doing a podcast. And I never would have learned these things about myself if I didn't explore outside of my 9-to-5 job and if I didn't explore and experiment with different things. There is so much opportunity that exists in this professional sphere. And I think social media, there are a lot of downsides of social media that I've mentioned numerous times, but social media really has done what I personally think is a great job of opening up opportunity that otherwise it literally didn't exist. Even when I first started working, like it didn't exist in the way it does now. So in my opinion, like using your 20s to try everything and to experiment and to be a sponge is the best path to figure out what your career success or your definition of career success is going to look like. My dad always told me that when I went to work, I needed to be a sponge and learn as much as I possibly could on the company's dime, because the more you know, the better decisions you can make and the easier it becomes to figure out the path that you actually want to be on. There's something to be said about a portfolio career, which is a career that you build where you hold different types of jobs, you get different types of experiences, you make money doing different things rather than just a true linear path. I'm not saying that this is better than a corporate path because it's not. Like each path has its own pros and cons. But what I am saying is that it's an option, and it's an option that I didn't know about until later in my 20s, but it's an option that is very prevalent, I think, in society today. My friend Hannah, her handle is Hannah Gets Hired with Hanna. There's no extra H. She talks a lot about portfolio careers and like building a portfolio career. So she's a good follow if you are someone who's interested in that. Moving on though, now let's talk about lifestyle in your 20s, because your 20s, again, when we're thinking about calculated experimentation, beyond just your financials and your career, it's also related to friendships and hobbies and figuring out, again, like who you want to surround yourself with, where you want to be. I mean, I think where you want to be changes constantly, but my best advice in your 20s, and I think this supersedes all financial advice and all career advice, is to move. You have to move out of your home state or your home city. Maybe, if you can't move out of state, move to a different town. Put yourself in an environment that forces you to meet new people and try new things. This isn't the only time in your life where you can do it, but it's the easiest time in your life where you can do it. The world is so big and there is so much out there to discover. And I cannot emphasize enough how much my life changed when I put myself out of my comfort zone and moved to a new city. And it was not easy, but it was essential. Moving to a new state was quite literally the best thing that I ever did. If you stay at home and you stay in your little bubble, in your comfort zone that you grew up in, you will never push yourself to branch out. You have to push yourself to do this. You have to push. It's not something that I think comes easily to a lot of people. Moving forces you to make new friends. It forces you to discover a different way of life than what you're used to. It makes the world feel less scary and intimidating, and it makes navigating big life changes way easier. This is your first taste and your first flavor of doing that, and it's something that you will experience most likely over and over and over and over and over again all throughout your life. So moving, I think, is the best way to teach yourself how to navigate life challenges. Do I think I'll ultimately end up back at home? Most likely. I don't know. I don't know what the future holds. But now that I've lived in different places, I feel completely confident that I can handle anything. I can integrate myself into a new place. I can make new friends anywhere as an adult. These are crucial life skills. They are crucial life skills. And if you are not pushing yourself to do them in your 20s, it gets harder and harder and harder to learn how to do these things and to feel really confident doing these things beyond your 20s. So if you are someone and maybe you're in your early 20s or your mid 20s and either you're living at home or you moved back to, the same town after that you grew up in after you graduated college, I really, really, really encourage you to think about moving somewhere new. And I know someone's going to say, not everybody can move somewhere new because it's expensive, and I totally get that. But if you can plan ahead, if you can think about a place that you would want to move to, even if it's just for a short period of time, like a month or two, going out and discovering a different place, I so encourage you to find a place and try a new place, because, I have friends all over, and I have lots of friends who stayed in my home area post grad, and they have a lot of the same friends from high school. I think this is great, but I think back and think about how many people and how many experiences I never would have had if I hadn't moved out of Boston. So, I wouldn't change it for anything, and I'd do it again in a heartbeat, and I really think everyone should be doing this. The last area that I want to touch on for experimenting in your 20s is your mindset, because your 20s are full of comparison. This is really the first time in your life that the people around you start moving at different speeds, because up until you graduate college, all of your peers are sort of on the same path, and then you graduate college and like the branch off is immediate. And let me tell you something, it does not get better as you get older. It doesn't get easier as you get older. If anything, at least from my experience, the comparison gets worse and a little bit more challenging to navigate. So use your 20s to figure out your coping skills. Notice how you operate under pressure, or when you see friends hitting milestones that you haven't reached yet. Notice how you feel about that, and start figuring out how to best handle the mental aspect of this and get ahead of the negative thoughts or the comparison. Something that helped me was managing different expectations of friends and learning that not every friend is going to be for everything, and to really get clear on what to expect from different people based off of how they act and present to you. Like, I think something that I honestly think this is a negative narrative I see a lot on social media, that like if they wanted to, they would. If somebody cared about you, they would. If people are treating you poorly, that's one thing. But I think that expecting everything from everyone is only going to set you up for failure, because everybody is doing their own thing and has their own lives and has their own web of people that they're navigating and their own shit they're dealing with at work. And, some people in their 20s are starting families or whatever. So the way that you operate in personal relationships is going to and has to shift in your 20s. Like, there's really no way around that. And so I found that learning what to expect from different people just helped me better manage those expectations and not think somebody was going to be a certain way only for them to end up acting really differently. It just honestly, like, it helps you from over expecting of people and not being disappointed or getting resentful if maybe they don't reciprocate relationships in the way that you hope they would. Something else that I've experimented a lot with, especially I would say in my later 20s, is journaling and meditation, and then obviously all different types of exercise. What I found works best for me to help with my mindset and my anxiety is structuring my routines, building in long walks to my day, disconnecting from my phone. This is a big one, especially during tumultuous events, and nurturing one-to-one relationships rather than big friend groups. Your mind will be with you through every decade, so I would challenge you to not fear sitting with emotions and learning how to cope with them, because it's a skill that you have to bring into your 30s and your 40s and your 50s and beyond. So your mindset is something that I would really, 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 really focus on experimenting with. And don't feel like, anything is silly. I, struggled with journaling for a while. I struggled with meditation for a while. And I don't do these things every single day, but I have a toolkit of, if I'm feeling really stressed or I'm feeling overwhelmed or I'm feeling like my brain is just too full, I have things that I'll do and things in my toolkit that I'll pivot to that I know work for me because I've tried them. So use this time to really try and figure out, maybe you're not a walker. Maybe a long run is something that clears your brain. Maybe going to a class and being around other people is what clears your brain. Maybe, meditating for 20 minutes and writing in your journal is what clears your brain. Maybe going to therapy is what clears your brain. Like, figure out what works best for you so that you can learn how to self-soothe and cope when things come up in your life, because they will. And I do feel like as you get older, I don't want to say problems, but like the events that come up in your life just get bigger and bigger and bigger. So now let's move into part 2 of this episode, which are the shifts that you start to make in your 30s. I think generally the theme for your 30s is stability. So I've only been in my 30s for a couple of months at this point, so I obviously don't know everything, and I'm not claiming to, but I do feel like turning 30 comes with a huge mindset shift, not only around how you feel about yourself, but also how you look at the world and your perspective, at least if you're an introspective person, which is something that I feel like I am. When it comes to finances, your 30s really are more for stability. The goal in your 30s is to make sure, when we're thinking about the basics from your 20s, your 30s is sort of like, you got to have an emergency fund. You're probably investing a little more consistently. Ideally, you've either paid off your student loans or you've made progress towards paying off your student loans. I know timing of schools and grad schools and upper education and all of that impacts this, but the goal is like, hopefully you've got a grip on your plan in that regard. Maybe you're thinking about bigger financial milestones like buying property or starting a family if you have not done those things already in your 20s. So on this topic though, I think we need to start treating having a family like a financial milestone, I think particularly in 2025, because it's so expensive. And like, why are we being so casual about having a kid? I have a few friends who have kids, and the more I learn about raising a child, like, I cannot believe how expensive it is. I can't even believe how expensive it is to just give birth. Like, it's crazy. It's helped me gain so much clarity on my own financial goals, what I want in my life, and how they play into whether I decide to have children and start a family or not, which, to be clear, I've not made a 100% decision on that. But I'm definitely thinking about what I want in my life and if I can accomplish those things if I have children. So the more that I observe, the more I learn. And again, I think that all really boils back to the comparison and learning how to navigate this in a healthy and productive way where it's not super detrimental on how you feel about yourself. When it comes to these other milestones, so like same with buying a house, I think we also need to start normalizing not buying property until your 30s or even your mid 30s. I think the current like average first time home buyer age is late 30s, like 38, and it used to be much younger, especially in the current market, and especially if you live in a major city or on a coast, which many, many people do. I'm just tired of this narrative of like, well, if you lived in Ohio, you could do all of these things. And like, that's great. But if you don't have a reason to be there, it doesn't really matter. Like if I've learned anything about moving all around, it's that you really do have to like the place you live. And sometimes sacrificing on square footage or whatever, depending on, again, the phase of life you're in, is worth it to live in a space or in a place that you love. So, I love Massachusetts, for example, and I also love California a lot. And I'd love to own my own property, but tell me why those are the two most expensive housing markets in the country. Like, it's crazy. I have so many videos on my page about renting versus buying, and I'm not going to get into that conversation in this episode in specifics. But if you're in your 20s and you're stressed about buying a house, like, don't be, because there's so many factors that play into it. And to be completely transparent, it's way better, again, in my opinion. So remember, all of this is just my opinion, but it's way better, in my opinion, to continue to rent if you're unsure, as opposed to just buying property because you feel like you're supposed to do that, especially if it's a property that's outside of your budget or something that you can't afford truly. So, the conversation around having a house and having a family, like, we really need to change the narrative here, because I even think to myself, like, I'm a high earner, right? I don't think any of us can sit here and deny that. And from a financial standpoint, I have my shit together. these two things feel financially out of reach for me. I can't imagine and if I was in a different financial position. And granted, if I'm having a baby, there's another person involved, right? So that's another income. But even still, like I just can't picture it in the current financial state. So I'm going to move on from this because I don't want to get too far down that rabbit hole. When it comes to work, the goal in your 30s is to find your path and really start building. So like I mentioned, in your 20s, the goal is to try some different jobs or industries. Maybe you discovered corporate isn't for you and you want to freelance, or, you found your corporate path and you want to pursue it and climb that ladder. Like your 30s are for finding that path and setting the vision for where you want to go. Something I want to remind you of, turning 30 is still the beginning of your career. Like at 30, you still have another 30 years of work. So this idea that we have to figure out everything by 30 is insane, because I'm 30 now and I'll likely work for another, 20 to 30 years, which is 2x my entire life. Like I can't even comprehend that because that's so many years. And I feel like the narrative is like, oh, I'm 28 and I haven't figured out what job I like. So it doesn't matter because you still have so many years that you have to work. Like so many successful people never found their path until their 40s and their 50s. Like it takes time to figure it out. The goal really shouldn't be by 30 to be, 110% figured out in your career. It should just be to be on the path that you see yourself on, right? Because every year things change. And I think we need to really remove this pressure around having it all figured out, and 30 is the deadline to do that. I also want to call out that if you're feeling lost at work, I did write a book about this. It's called Own Your Career, and you should read it. Next, pivoting into lifestyle. This is where your 30s really start to look different than your 20s, because the thing about your 30s is that literally everyone's doing something different. Like in your 20s, you start to see people branch, but in your 30s, you start to see people really, really settle. So friendships change and lifestyles change. People have families. Others are more focused on work. Others are making decisions not to have kids. Everyone's really starting to make those choices, and it branches you off even further. So in my 30s, at least right now, I'm focused on a few key lifestyle elements. So first is really nurturing one-on-one relationships and connection, and maintaining my ability to make new friends at this stage in my life. This is another thing, is by the time people hit 30, I feel like a lot of people, particularly those who are married in relationships and have kids, lose their interest in creating and nurturing new relationships. In my opinion, this is a huge miss. I think it's a big problem. All throughout your life, you're going to be making new friends. I think it's really important. It's a skill. It's something you need to know how to do. And it's something that's very, very, very important to me, particularly female friendships, and having friends with people who are not only in the same life stage as me, but also who are interested in the same things as me and have a similar view of how they want their lives to unfold. Next is health and wellness. I want to stay healthy. I want to maintain a strong body because I'm now more aware of aging. I think this is another thing that happens in your late 20s and your 30s. You realize I'm not going to be young forever. And I am really focused on building muscle. I've talked about this in prior episodes, but I have no problem prioritizing money on health, wellness, gyms, Pilates, all of that. It's very important to me. And lastly is my home. Actually, I have two more. Next is my home. I'm willing to spend more on my space and make sure my space feels like my own and that I have the everyday luxuries that I need. I didn't care about this really until my late 20s. And in my 30s, this is the highest priority. I don't mind paying rent. I want to be comfortable and I want to like my space. And I'm not going to sacrifice on this, especially if I'm not, purchasing property. And lastly is my style. I've talked about this a ton too, but I'm really, really focused on finding my style and slowly upgrading my wardrobe to reflect that and really reflect my age. I am going to do a podcast episode on this. I have received a few questions. So I'm going to do a wardrobe style update that's coming in the next few weeks. I'm working on mapping that out now. But generally speaking, your 30s are for elevating your life. And the goal is that by this point, turning 30, you're feeling a little bit more established financially and at work. And you also have the flexibility to be able to like enjoy your life a little bit more than you did in your 20s. The last layer here is your mindset. And in my 30s, I'm very much so taking this seriously. I've mentioned on here that I'm going to therapy, and I also recently started with an SSRI because I have a lot of anxiety. I feel like in my 20s, I thought I could conquer this on my own. And I did experiment with a lot of ways to do it. But at 30, I've realized if I want my life to get better, I really need to take this seriously. And so I've been going to therapy, and it's really been helping me a lot. And I also feel very grateful that I've reached a point in my life where I can afford to do this, even on my own health insurance, because I always used to think that therapy was too expensive and I could just fix myself. And it just isn't something I can do on my own. It's also helped a lot with building confidence and feeling steady in my current phase of life, especially again, because your 30s are an age where people start asking you questions and there are different expectations of you, and it's just a totally different ball game. So therapy has helped me a lot. It's something I'm taking very seriously in my 30s because I just want to be happy. Like, I think that, I've tortured myself in my 20s with trying to be super successful or making decisions around things that I've now discovered I just don't even really want. And so I'm not doing that anymore in my 30s. So hopefully now you have a lot to think about, regardless of if you're in your 20s or your 30s. If you're in your 20s, what I would challenge you to do in terms of action items is try one new thing a year, okay? Maybe this is a new city, or it could be a new job, or it could be a new habit, or just a new apartment. But don't let 2 years go by where you don't make any changes in your life. This is really your time to evolve, and you evolve by pushing yourself to make changes and to have new experiences. When I look back at my 20s, I made a change to my life every year, and every year something was different. I had my first job at 22 and I moved into the city. So 22 is really where I start my 20s because that's when I graduated college. At 23, I got a new apartment. At 24, we had COVID, so I moved home. At 25, I built my business. At 26, I moved to LA. At 27, I quit my job. At 28, I moved into my own apartment. And at 29, I moved to Chicago. So think about how much, especially if you've been following me for a while, think about how much happened over that period of time. And it's really because I pushed myself to make changes. I've had lots of people message me and say that like they admire me. They think I'm very brave and courageous. Like, I don't think that, I don't want to discount the things that I've done in my 20s. So I'm going to actually not say that. But what I want to emphasize is we need to normalize trying new things. We need to normalize pushing ourselves out of our comfort zone and actually living life outside instead of just watching other people do things on social media. My heart breaks for Gen Z and these younger generations who have grown up and now exist in this space of such deep comparison to other people, because I also feel like it's created this fear of trying new things and this fear of being seen and this fear of trying things in general. So I would really, really push you to make changes. And again, when I look back at my 20s, I have no regrets. And I have no regrets because I know that I've tried everything, right? And I'm going to continue to try new things. I'm not going to stop just because I turned 30 or because there's a new set of, again, societal expectations on me. If you're in your 30s, I would challenge you to start getting reflective. So what areas of your life do you feel good about? What needs attention? What habits or things are you doing that may be self-sabotage, and how are you planning to address them? For me, like I said, that's going to therapy and really working on my anxiety and my OCD and those sort of tendencies. How can you begin to really elevate and reach the life that you actually want? If you're in your 30s, this is the time for, I don't want to say putting down roots, but for really curating the life you want based off of what you've learned in your 20s. To me, entering my 30s is like entering the beginning of my life. It's really like now we get started. Now I have the means to get started. I have the mindset to get started. I have, a career that provides me flexibility. I've figured it out and I can make these decisions. And because I didn't, jump into things in my 20s that are irreversible, I don't feel like I have any constraints on me. And it's a beautiful thing. And it's a beautiful thing that I think we should be celebrating a little bit more. But again, that's a conversation for probably a different episode. If you are in your 30s and you have a lesson from your 20s, for the girls who are in their 20s listening to this, I would love to hear from you. So make sure you leave a comment because I know that there are so many girls who listen to this. They've messaged me plentiful times who are seeking advice and seeking perspective. So I'd love to hear from you. Even if you're in your 20s and you've learned a lesson you feel is worth sharing, leave it in the comments either on Spotify or on YouTube. Otherwise, I hope you enjoyed this episode and I will catch you next week. Thanks so much for listening. Thanks so much for listening. If you enjoyed this episode, please make sure to leave me a review. Make sure to follow me on Spotify and Apple Podcasts, wherever you listen. And if you're watching this on YouTube, don't forget to like and subscribe. I'll see you next week.